This happened last year. I started dating a girl, and on a date, we decided to go for a walk in this gorgeous cemetery next to my house. As we were walking, I felt a tap on my waist. It sent tingles throughout my body, and assuming it was her, I told her to stop because I didn't like it. She had no idea what I was talking about. Moments later, I felt it again on my right hand. We were holding hands, my left in her right. I knew this wasn't her because there's no way she could have reached around my back to tap my right hand with her left. It was then that I got this super strong feeling of being watched. Now, my girlfriend is super scared of spirits because she's extremely susceptible to them too. So I didn't tell her anything, but I could feel cold sweat beading on the back of my neck. I made an excuse and we left. On our way out, I continuously felt the taps until they finally stopped near the entrance to the cemetery. I thought that was over with, but when we got back to my apartment, my girlfriend asked me if I heard humming. I'd been so caught up in my thoughts, I didn't realise that I heard a little girl humming a ring around the rosy. As soon as I tuned in though, it stopped. I told her I thought I heard something, but we just played it off on the fact that my building was super old and the walls were super thin. Until my girlfriend left that night, we both kept getting the feeling we were being watched. I walked her to the train station and the feeling stopped. After her train arrived, I started walking back home and I started getting a slew of weird thoughts. Random children's songs, random words. And then I felt like I was shaving thoughts, but instead of in my own voice, I heard them in a muffled little girl's voice. Words like, "Why don't you play with me? You're so boring. You wasted my day." Stuff like that. I was absolutely terrified when they were coupled with the sensation of something continuously touching my hand or pulling on it, as if a little kid was trying to get my attention. I ignored her as best I could, but the craziest thing happened when I crossed an old train track. She started screaming in my head, "Stop, don't go there. I can't go with you. It's too far from home." I didn't stop. I crossed over and then the voice of the little girl started crying and she yelled out, "Fine, I'll tell mother on you." Immediately, everything stopped. My mind cleared up. The feeling of being watched stopped. I went back home and fell asleep with no problem. The next day, I was doing some work when I started getting the feeling of being watched again. I was petrified. Not long after, I could feel breathing on my skin. It was a horrific feeling. I didn't know what to do, so I started texting my friend who had a ton of experience with spirits. She told me not to pay attention to it in case it was a demon, and not to type anything that it could see for itself. So I called her. I didn't tell her anything about the humming, just that I think I picked up a malicious spirit. Not 5 minutes into the call, she looks at me and goes, "Are you humming rings around the rosy?" It was then I knew I wasn't insane. I even later did a genetic test for schizophrenia, which came back clear. I switched to my phone and typed to her that the little girl was singing, and she sent me some prayers to say and some Wiccan spells if those didn't work. But soon after, the little girl just vanished again, after another hissy fit that I wasn't playing with her. She was furious and screamed at me that she was going to get her mother. That night, I had a very vivid dream about the little girl. She lived in the late 1800s to early 1900s. I saw her as a child being abused by her mother for not being pretty enough or smart enough. I saw her go to a school for mentally challenged kids, but they were all strapped into what seemed like torture devices. Then I saw her being lobotomized and finally murdered by her mother. At the very end, she told me her name, Charlotte. She was 8. The next morning, I went back to the cemetery, determined to see if I could find her tombstone. Sure enough, where I first started feeling the touches on my date, there was the tombstone that said, "In loving memory of our special daughter, C." And the rest of the name was weathered by age. The date had said 1882 to 1890, exactly 8 years. I was freaked out and went home immediately. No more appearances that day. That night, however, I was yanked from my bed. I looked around but couldn't see anything, but I had an overwhelming feeling of pure evil and dread. I saw images flashing before my eyes of Charlotte's mom whipping her and abusing her for not being normal and not being a lady. I felt an icy cold grip on my neck, and my throat felt like it was being crushed. After momentary paralysis, I turned on the lights, pulled out my phone, and started reciting the prayers my friend sent me. I heard screaming in my head, but that felt deafening, as if she was in pain. But eventually, it all disappeared. I never heard from Charlotte or her mom again. 2 months later, however, my landlord was fixing a pipe in the kitchen. We would often talk about stuff when he was doing maintenance, so I asked him about the property across the street that they owned but was completely abandoned. He said it used to be a school for mentally deranged children, basically psychopaths, and that they were found in the basement was full of torture devices and gurneys. They would strap children in to give them lobotomies. He even showed me pictures of these things. The house was abandoned because museums wouldn't take the items, and the city wouldn't help them get rid of them, claiming that they were protected under some bullshit monument or artifact law. A little more research done by myself, and I found out the buildings around me used to be mini farms with tons of slaves belonging to the upper echelons of society, and that my apartment was a brothel, and then a hotel, and then a mansion to some wealthy man and his wife, who had a daughter, before being turned into apartments. Oh, and the streetcar tracks that Charlotte wouldn't cross? That building used to be a church, and that ground was holy. I never felt more validated that I wasn't insane in my life. I'm hesitant to leave my room at night, besides for the bathroom, because if I'm the only one awake, I tend to hear voices from downstairs. We've got a big, creaky house, so I'm sure it's usually my brain turning normal settling noises into conversations. I can handle the ones I'm not involved in, and I think I know their hallucinations by indicators like me knowing very specific details about who the voices belong to. I just don't like it when they say my name. I've heard both sing-songy calls from down there and harsh whispers from maybe the third stair up to the hallway. Again, I used to accept these as brain-fucky quirks, until other people started hearing it. My younger brother is 16 and really loves scaring the shit out of himself. When he claims to hear things, I don't really pay it any mind because he had the same shit childhood as mine, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got similar issues. We've even heard things at the same time, including heavy boots on our stairs, a woman crying in my parents' bedroom while no one was home, and a man's cough from his bedroom while we were eating dinner alone downstairs. We responded to all of these by tactically checking the house with kitchen knives and then locking ourselves in our bedrooms. Recently, my mom told us about waking up to a growl beside her bed, which I've experienced myself but, again, wrote off as an hallucination. And she told us in secret that my extremely skeptical stepfather recently heard someone whisper his name twice from under the bed. Of course, because both of them were asleep, it could be extremely mild sleep paralysis. It just weirds me out that both of them admit to something they've made fun of me for taking about before. A few hallmarks of weird shit that's gone down recently. My mum and brother were sitting at the counter when the top of a coffee jar popped into the air and landed directly beside it. I heard them both shriek as I was walking up the stairs when it happened. My skeptical girlfriend slept over and said she woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of children running in the hallway. My bedroom door was open, even though I'd closed and locked it, and neither of us recalled getting up. I have 2 younger siblings, 3 and 5, but obviously neither would be awake and they can't leave their shared nursery without my parents unlocking the door. She jokes about my haunted house, but claims not to believe in ghosts. Parents went away to stay at a resort for a few days, picked up my brother from work at 11 after my own 9-hour shift, and my dog was closed in the laundry room where he sleeps. There was blood and diarrhea all over the floor, so we rushed him to a 24-hour vet. Turns out he got so nervous being locked in there, he bursted blood vessels in his colon and let rip the red tides. Weird part is, he's a really chill young guy and hasn't done anything like that before. There's also only a 4-inch space between the wide open door and the laundry machine. He'd have to nudge it closed somehow, which doesn't make sense and isn't something he's ever done in his 5 years. My fear was that someone had been in our house and closed him in there. Again, he's a really chill guy and from experience, he'd go anywhere anybody led him. We live on an acre of land in a little farming community, and a lot of neighbours visit him and hop the fence to bring him treats and toys. I kind of brushed this off as a weird incident, and my brother and I were starving and decided to eat outside before cleaning up the blood shit. On the porch, we talked about how our dog could have closed himself in there. Both of us couldn't come up with anything that wasn't scary as hell. Like 10 minutes into choking down some burgers, and we both jump up. The light in the living room, which we could see from our seats, turned off. This essentially confirmed my theory that someone had closed the dog in there, and they were still in our house. I get ready to call the cops, but my brother runs to the garage and stupidly turns on the light, which can be seen from fucking everywhere because it's separate for the house. He comes running back with a mini hacksaw and a goddamn mallet. I'm pretty good at shutting off my emotions for survival, so I took the hacksaw and was just kind of resigned to death or killing someone. I'm really scared of cops, so calling them just didn't seem worth it anymore and went around the back of the house. From the back, all of the windows to everything are visible. We scanned the dark living room, the kitchen, and the front room and saw nothing. Then my brother goes, "Oh fuck." Through their balcony door window, we could see that my parents' bedroom door is wide open into a dark hallway. Fucked up thing is, we'd gone up to change before we ate and the door was most definitely closed and I'd left the light on. Again, I should have called the cops at this point, but I was so numb to all reason and we went inside. For some reason, my brother started yelling and slamming all the doors he checked, which was surprisingly intimidating. I didn't chime in because he's got a deep voice and I have an extremely feminine and light one, which wouldn't do much work. We checked every room, every bed, closet, bathroom. The last thing we checked was the nursery closet, and I swear to God, I thought someone was going to jump out. But there was nothing. Nobody was in there, unless they somehow managed to escape unnoticed in the 30 seconds it took us to run inside. We slept on the couches that night. Again, my brother and I were home alone. I'm not religious, but I like Catholic imagery, so I have a lot of prayer candles. It's pretty common for my Jesus and Santo Niño de Atocha ones to inexplicably fall off my desk. I've only been in the room when it happened once. I was doing my makeup and right behind me in the mirror, both just slid off and hit the ground. They're sturdy enough not to break. It's just a weird recurring thing. My mom saw someone walk into my brother's room and from the corner of her eye, I apparently was at work. But she claims she didn't remember that my brother was at work as well, until he called her later to pick him up. We have a weird Harry Potter-style closet under the stairs. It's really creepy, painted with a thin coat of streaky gold paint, and it has the names and ages of 3 kids that lived in the house before us painted on the door. They were allegedly a really creepy religious family of like 6 kids and 5 adults all crammed in here. Reportedly got in trouble with neighbour parents for playing Ouija, lol. It's happened before, but it's become relatively frequent that the last person will turn off all the lights and walk upstairs, only to see that the light in the closet is on. Last month, my mum woke up to get a glass of water, and as she was walking up the stairs, she heard the door creak open and the light switch click on. She's not white, so she had the good sense to just keep walking, rather than investigate. I work at a popular chain restaurant that does delivery service. I work long hours and I like my job. Delivering at night is a little spooky sometimes, but otherwise, I have no complaints about what I do. Tonight, I had an order in the back of a pretty dark neighbourhood that doesn't have streetlights, and the neighbours are acres between each other, so it's pretty spacious. I park my car at the guest's house and make the roughly 200-foot walk up the driveway. Porch lights are on, I leave the food on the porch as instructed. As I turn to start walking back, I heard what sounded like a large dog bark. But it's loud, and it sounds like it's in front of me, next to the window at the front of the house. The guest walked outside right then and said thank you. She was very polite. I said thank you. By the way, do you have a dog? She replied no, but my neighbour has a chihuahua. She's a tiny thing. I said thank you once again and was on my way. I was about to get into my car when I heard a whisper coming from in front of me. It sounded like it was only a few feet in front of my car, but it was low and deep. It said, come here, come here. And that's when chills went down my body and I booked it out of there, no hesitation. I was nearly in tears, mainly from confusion. What could have possibly happened tonight? Am I losing it? I do believe in ghosts and spirits and such, but what was the meaning of that? I'm sitting in the parking lot of my job as I write this. I'm confused and a bit spooked for sure. Any help would be appreciated, or at least some direction on what this might mean. Some weird stuff has been happening in my dorm tonight, and apparently I'm not the only one experiencing this. I've had people on my dorm floor tell me they've had some strange stuff happen to them later into the night or early morning, around 1 to 3 a.m. For context, I was unable to sleep as I woke up late and lived in a dorm built in 1939, the oldest standing dorm my university still has around. I live on the 3rd floor, the top floor of my dorm, and tonight I wanted to be productive and get some laundry done while I can, since the laundry room here is always in use. I went out of my room and immediately began feeling like someone was watching me from behind me. I ignored it since I looked over my shoulder and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I make it down to the room and the ground floor where the lobby is, and the feeling is still there as I'm starting to walk towards the steps of the basement. I look over my shoulder and behind the structural pillar in the lobby is a black figure that I could make out a shoulder and an arm moving back around the corner, as if something was hiding. I looked around the lobby and no one was there. I became very freaked out by this and checked the basement and no one is active in there. Everything is silent. On the bright side, the laundry room was free to use, but too freaked out to go back down there. Other things that will happen to me is I'll see shadows of feet underneath my door and hear footsteps like someone walking down the hall at night. Sometimes I look through the peephole in my door to see if there's someone out there, and it has a big field of view, but sometimes there will not be anyone there. The doors in my dorm are extremely heavy, and it's very loud when opening or closing them, and I would know if someone comes in or out of a room. Finally, the floor has a few unisex bathrooms, and I typically will use the one right next to my room. Sometimes I'll be up late and open the door all of the way and turn the lights out. Mind you, there are several bathrooms all over the floor, and this one isn't the most popular. The light will just turn on randomly and the door position never moves. Normally, people leave it barely cracked or halfway open, and I'm the only one that I know of who opens it completely when finished. This likely can be easily explained, but it still freaks me out. For some context, I was visiting my grandmother on my mum's side for the weekend. My aunts and uncles are usually there as well, and we always do that on the weekend to check up on her and see how she's doing. Now, for the entire day, I had the feeling I was being watched or followed, but for the sake of not creeping anyone out, I just shrugged it off as paranoia. Around late afternoon, I went to wash my hair and was there for quite some time. Now, my mother didn't know that, so she was calling me from in the kitchen. Usually I'd be able to hear her, but after 10 minutes in there, it sounded as if the entire house had gone quiet, so I couldn't hear her at all. And my sister told her where I was, but she replied, "No, I just saw her in here. She was playing with the cats. She just passed me." When she told my sister that, she came by the door of the bathroom and told me what our mother had just said in a very confused voice. I was also confused because I'd only seen one of the cats all day and couldn't find the other one for feeding time, so I assumed he was in one of the rooms ignoring me because he did that a lot. Now that way before I went to wash my hair, so around morning, going into the afternoon. After that, I hurried to finish up and went to the kitchen where my mother was. She looked up at me and said, "Why are you changed? You were just with the cats a few minutes ago." I shook my head and told her I'd been in the shower washing my hair, so I couldn't have been with the cats when she saw me. She simply shrugged and told me that she must have mistaken someone else for me. But as she said that, I felt a feeling of dread in the room. Now, I'm not sure if she truly was mistaken or if she really saw something, but I know my aunt had gotten mistaken last week, thinking I was out in the garden with the cats, and I was with my grandmother at the time. I don't know if I'm just paranoid and taking this too seriously, but I'm mostly worried for the cats because they were with me both times. Do you think the cats might be in danger if this entity is really pretending to be me? Can it pose a threat to my grandmother as well? And if yes to either question, what do I do? So I've had encounters pretty much all my life. It started when my grandmother on my father's side passed away a year before I was born. Eventually, after I was born, the house we lived in started to be filled with the scent of her perfume. Our dog would go nuts at shadows on the walls, and at night, the mobile above my crib would randomly go off. It even continued until a speaking book on the floor opened up and started to play. Eventually, my family queued in and told her to leave, and all was thought to be good. When we moved to our new house, I developed a fear of going up the stairs by myself, due to the shadow person. My family for years believed it was always fear of the day, as I had always said the shadow person lived on the top of the stairs. Well, flashback to 2 years ago now, and when with a medium, she asked me about the stairs and what is wrong with them. I responded, "I saw something there." And she said, "Oh, that's just your grandmother watching you." That quickly became commonplace as I started to see my grandmother's spirits in my room for sometimes weeks on end. It would even sit by the foot of my bed, and sometimes I could feel her walking behind me. That was another thing the medium told me about, was her spirit was aware when I knew she was around. But recently, things sort of shifted. One night, I woke up to a dark shadow thing standing on the edge of my bed. When I told my family, my brother chimed in, "Oh, you see that too? Sometimes it comes to my room and watches." He showed us where it watches from, and it was a straight beeline to where it appeared in my room. It freaked out my family, as it wasn't anybody we could have known, and nobody had died recently. So we now stay on the lookout for the creature dubbed Bob. A little over a decade ago, I experienced the scariest event that's ever happened to me. I was, at the time, living with my mother. Her home is one of the oldest houses in the city she lives in, which is known as the oldest town in Texas. The house has quite a bit of history. It's known in our family as being haunted. When you walk through the house, you can feel it in the hardwood floors and the walls creak from the weight pushing down on the floors. When you were alone in the house and this happened, you knew that someone was walking through the house. You would go to greet whoever was coming, but often there was nobody there. I only say this to give you the sight that something is or was up with that house. Moving on, the night of this experience. I was up at 1 a.m. playing Red Dead Redemption online. While sitting in the gaming chair, I suddenly got an odd feeling. As mentioned above, the house gives you these odd feelings at different times, so I just tried to ignore it. All of a sudden, while playing, the hearing in my right ear goes out. It literally felt as if someone cupped my ear, and then the loudest ear ringing I've ever had started. I wish that I could adequately describe how intense the ringing was. Immediately, my body hair starts standing up, and I get an intense feeling that I can only describe as my brain telling me I'm about to be attacked by a predator. In my head, I'm literally telling myself, dude, you're tripping. Stop being a wimp. You know how to fight. Why are you afraid because of your ears ringing? And things along that same thought pattern. The ringing finally subsides after about 30 seconds or so. I stay seated and continue gaming on Red Dead Redemption. I'm thinking about how odd it was for about 1 minute before it happens. Whoosh! The hearing in my left other ear goes muffled. Immediately, the ringing starts blaring. Once again, the hair on my body stands straight up. I can feel the tiny hairs on my body pushing against my clothing, and I once again get the feeling that I'm in danger. I'm telling myself things like, don't be a wimp, stop being a bitch, yes, again, and so on. I'm telling myself this while at the same time, my gut is telling me I need to get away. My inner dialogue would be hilarious to listen to if the situation was different. It would be a mix of, dude, you're tough, why are you tripping? My gut at the same time is telling me, leave now, go. Something isn't right. Well, of course, my brave, manly dialogue wins, and I push through until the ringing stops, and the muffled cupping of my ear clears up. All is clear on the home front, right? Of course not. I'm not even gaming anymore after the second event. I'm staring at the TV thinking about what just happened. I'm literally thinking about what kind of medical conditions would cause that type of reaction in one ear and then the other. I'd guess another minute or so passed and then whoosh! Both of my ears feel as though they're cupped and the sound, atmosphere or something is snatched away from my senses. Of course the ringing that I cannot begin to adequately describe. I promise you that there was not one single hair on my body that wasn't standing straight up. I feel that they were standing up so straight that they were pushing new hairs through my skin. Every millimetre on my skin was goosebumps and hairs trying to vacate my body. There was no inner dialogue telling me how brave or tough I was. My gut was screaming at me, run, run, run now, run now. I cannot describe the terror that was in my body. I felt like a child about to be devoured by a lion. I stood up and turned around and quick walked to the bedroom. It honestly took every bit of my manly ways to not break off into a dead sprint through the house. I climbed into bed next to my wife, who was asleep. She rolled over and touched my arm and woke up. Baby, what's wrong? The goosebumps on my body was so irregular that it brought my wife out of her sleep. I know how they felt to me, but if anything, I'm understanding how intense the sensations were. I don't remember what I told my wife, but I'd imagine it was me downplaying what had happened so that it didn't scare her. I'm sorry for the anticlimactic ending. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything chasing me. When I got to the room, no furniture moved or anything spookier than what had already happened. I've had some strange experiences before in my life, but I can tell you that nothing that I've ever experienced has caused my body and mind to go into primal fear mode. I had always thought that I knew what primal anger, primal fear, or primal emotions are. Up until that point, I didn't. About a year and a half ago, I was sleeping in bed with my wife. I'm having a strange dream about a shadow figure chasing me saying, you need to let us in, you need to let us in. This voice is calling to me in a child's voice. I'm running from this thing and it's getting closer. You need to let us in. It gets to the point that this shadow is about 5 or so feet away in the middle of saying, you need to let us in. And my wife elbows me and wakes me up saying, baby, did you hear that? I'm just coming out of my sleep and she says, I heard kids talking. I asked her if it was our boys talking. She replies, no, it wasn't the kids. Even while she was telling me that she heard kids talking, I was already wondering in my mind if I was talking in a kid's voice while I slept. When she said no, it just reaffirmed to me in my head that I was dreaming and talking in a child's high-pitched voice. I played dumb and tell her that I don't know what it is, and everything is alright. In my head though, I'm convinced that I'm talking in a child's voice. Really, I just didn't want to freak her out and tell her that I'm being chased by a shadow saying, "You need to let us in," while simultaneously speaking in a high-pitched voice while I'm sleeping. The next day, I go to work and I'm telling people that I worked with what happened. I'm not giving the details of me being chased by a shadow, and I wasn't getting into details about what the shadow was saying. What I was telling them was that I was talking in my sleep, and apparently I was talking in a kid's voice because I woke up my wife and she thought kids were talking in our room. I must have told 2 or 3 people about me talking in my sleep while making light of the situation. I'm completely certain at this point in time that it was me. Fast forward a year or so to roughly 6 to 8 months ago. At this point in time, we've moved from our house in Colorado to a place in Texas. Once again, I'm asleep and I'm having a near identical dream. A shadow is chasing me saying, "You have to say that we can come in." Once again, I'm running from this shadow trying to escape while it's saying that over and over. This time, the shadow was close. When I say close, I mean within arm's reach. As the shadow is reaching out to grab me and is inches from touching me, a high-pitched child's voice says, "Come in." As the shadow is inches from grabbing me and the words "come in" are hitting the second syllable, my wife elbows me. "Baby." I wake up and the first thought that pops in my head is that I'm talking in a kid's voice again. I wait for her to tell me what she heard, that she heard kid's voice again. She asks me, "Were you just standing over me on my side of the bed? I just saw a shadow," or maybe she said silhouette, staring down at me. I tell her, "No, baby, I was lying here asleep." Once again, I didn't say what I was dreaming about or detail what happened before. I don't want to freak her out and say something like, "Hey, that's crazy. I was just dreaming about a shadow figure while you saw one in the room. Cool, huh?" I downplayed the situation while comforting the wife, but in my head, I immediately thought back to the first dream and how it was the exact same dream that happened before. In both dreams, a shadow was chasing me. In both dreams, it was an identical high-pitched child's voice telling me to let us in. And the most scary thing of all is that in both dreams, right at the climax, my wife has woken me up right as the shadow was about to catch me. After this most recent dream, it makes me wonder if it was actually me speaking in the child's voice the first time. I think back on how I made light of the situation and joked about it at work with co-workers. I went a few months without telling my wife about the dreams, but I finally told her. She remembers both instances and it really freaks her out. I've got to be honest that after the second incident, it has caused an immense amount of food for thought on my end. I don't necessarily feel scared from the dream, but the weird factor feels like a 10 out of 10.